Have you ever wondered why a man seems distant when you're near, yet haunted when you finally walk away? It is not coincidence. It is not confusion. It is the unconscious mind unraveling the illusion it once projected onto you. Carl Jung spoke often of anima and animus, the inner feminine in the male psyche, and the inner masculine in the female. Every man carries within him an image of the feminine, a soul companion, not of flesh and blood, but carved in shadow, shaped by memory, mother, myth, and projection. And when a woman enters his life bearing even a fragment of that image, when her presence resonates with the ancient call of his unconscious, he is drawn. But here is the paradox. What is familiar to his soul terrifies his ego. The more she reflects his deeper yearning, the more he resists her in the realm of the conscious. He might mock her softness, retreat from her silence, dismiss her wisdom. Why? Because he does not yet understand the power she holds over the parts of himself he refuses to meet. This is why obsession doesn't begin when you're in his arms. It begins in absence, in the silence that echoes where your voice once lingered, in the void you leave behind not only in his bed, but in his psyche. You were never just a woman to him. You were a mirror. And the ego despises mirrors it cannot control. A man may crave pleasure, comfort, submission. But when faced with a woman rooted in self-possession who offers her presence without begging, who gives without groveling, who can walk away without flinching, he is faced with a crisis of self. For such a woman is not chasing love. She is the embodiment of it. She becomes, in Jungian terms, an activation of his shadow. That part of himself he disowns, denies, and avoids. So when she leaves, something ancient begins to stir. At first, it's subtle. A missed call, a fleeting memory, a scent on his shirt that won't fade. But as the days stretch and her silence deepens, so does the pull. Because now, she is no longer a person. She is an unresolved story. A chapter left open in his unconscious, echoing like a myth he cannot forget. And myths, especially the ones we deny, do not die. They return. Here's what most women don't know. When you stay and plead, when you chase, explain, cry, and shrink to keep him, he feels nothing. Not because he lacks feeling, but because the dynamic keeps him safe, safe from change, safe from self-confrontation. But when you go silent, not out of manipulation, but from a place of wholeness, his unconscious begins to speak. He dreams of you, not always clearly, not always kindly. Sometimes you're a blur, a stranger, a flame in the distance. Sometimes you're just an ache in his chest. But make no mistake, your absence is not empty. It is a presence more powerful than presence. This is where obsession is born, not in attraction, not in lust, not in your shared laughter over dinner, but in the psychic rupture you cause by leaving. Carl Jung taught that all longing is really longing for the self, the deepest, truest version of one's being. So when a man obsesses over a woman he once took for granted, it is not merely her body he craves. It is the version of himself he touched when she was near, the safety, the mystery, the mirror, the meaning. And when that version vanishes, when she no longer reflects his potential but withdraws into her own orbit untouchable, unknowable, he begins to crave not her, but his lost self. The more spiritually anchored she is, the deeper this impact. For a woman rooted in her feminine essence, graceful, receptive, soft, yet impenetrable, is no ordinary stimulus. She awakens the sacred within him, even as his logic mocks it. She is the priestess of emotional alchemy, inviting him toward individuation without ever naming it. But he cannot follow unless he is ready, and most are not. So when she walks away, he does not run after her. Not immediately. First he convinces himself she'll return. Then he distracts himself, numbs, finds replacements, but nothing lands. No touch satisfies, no smile pierces, because none of them were her, and none of them touched the place she did. Beneath the ego, beyond the flesh, in the sacred silence where soul recognizes soul. And that is where obsession is forged, in the unbearable realization that he had something rare and did not know how to hold it. He begins to notice her absence in strange ways, not just in the quiet of his mornings or the untouched side of the bed, but in his very being. His thoughts feel scattered, his confidence wavers. His energy, once so stable in her presence, now spikes in erratic bursts of longing and regret. But he won't call it that. He'll tell himself he's fine, that he's busy, that he's moving on. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle war has begun between the part of him that wants to forget and the part that cannot. Carl Jung would call this the tension of the opposites, the psychic conflict that drives transformation. A man torn between denial and desire enters a psychological furnace, and the more evolved his soul, the more intense the heat. This is not heartbreak, it is initiation. It is shadow work by force. He is being haunted by a woman not because she left, but because she revealed something before she did. In her silence, he hears the voice of his own unconscious, and it is not kind. It whispers truths he refused to face. It repeats the things she never said, but her eyes always carried. That he lacked depth, that his wounds ruled him, that her love was never about validation but about presence. And presence, real presence, is not performative. It cannot be replaced. Now he scrolls through old messages, not to find information but to feel, to trace the tone of her voice in written words, to see if she ever said what he now knows she meant. But no message can soothe what has been awakened, because what he lost was not just her, but the version of himself she allowed him to glimpse. Do you understand now? This is the secret most women never realize. Your departure is not merely a moment, it is a mirror crashing to the ground. It shatters his illusion of control. It exposes his dependence on your softness, your emotional intuition, your capacity to hold space for parts of him he doesn't even accept. He did not chase you when you stayed, because your presence made him feel whole without effort. But once it's gone, the whole becomes real. And in that vacuum, obsession festers not with your smile or your body, but with the mystery you represented. Mystery is the feminine's most sacred gift. Not mystery as a game or manipulation, but as divine withholding, as the knowledge that you are not meant to be completely understood or possessed, but witnessed. That your silence is not absence, but sacred boundary. That your love is not servitude, but choice. When you walk away, rooted in your worth, you become something mythic. You become the woman he tells stories about but never names, the one he compares others to but never admits, the one who could have been the one had he been more. And still he watches, from afar. Maybe not visibly, maybe not actively, but you remain on the edge of his thoughts, like a flame flickering in a room he never enters but always senses. Because your leaving was not punishment, it was prophecy, a signpost on his path, marking the place where ego fell and soul could rise, if only he would allow it. You did not break him, you revealed him. And whether he grows from that revelation or stays in denial is not your responsibility. The feminine does not exist to fix or to wait. She exists to be, to embody, to evolve, to withdraw, when the sacred is no longer respected. And so, you go, not because you are cold, but because you are clear. You understand what so many fear, that your value does not increase when you are chosen. It shines brightest when you choose yourself. You are not the echo of his needs. You are the answer to your own becoming. So let him ache. Let him roam the ruins of what he once had and never honored. Let his obsession grow, not out of cruelty, but out of the natural law of the psyche. What is unintegrated returns. What is disrespected becomes divine. What is lost becomes legend. Because you didn't just walk away, you awakened something he can't unsee. And that is why his obsession begins after you leave. Time, they say, heals all wounds. But this is not a wound, it is a reckoning. And time does not ease a reckoning, it deepens it. He may distract himself, yes. Throw himself into work, friends, fleeting encounters that mimic intimacy but lack essence. He may even pretend he's moved on. And perhaps, on the surface, it seems so. His feed shows smiles. His voice sounds composed. But inside, the storm has only just begun. Carl Jung wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And this man, this wounded archetype, becomes a master of avoidance. Because to face the truth of her absence is to face the truth of himself. Not the version he shows the world, but the fractured one hiding beneath his charisma, success, or bravado. You are a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. Her departure wasn't just a goodbye. It was a removal of light, the light that once softened his rage, the light that steadied his mind, the light that allowed him, briefly, to believe he was more than his pain. Without that radiance, he is left with his raw edges, his unhealed mother wound, his silent father complex, his dependency on being admired instead of being known. This is why he cannot forget her, because she was not there to complete him. She was there to reveal him. And no matter how far he runs, the psychic imprint remains, not just her scent or her laughter, but the feeling she awakened. A feeling of being fully seen and yet somehow still loved. For a man who has built his identity on control, this is unbearable. Because love, real love, does not obey ego. It humbles it. So now, in his silence, he begins to search. He may not call it that. He may not even know what he's looking for. But every scroll, every song, every sleepless night is a breadcrumb trail back to her. Not for closure, not even for reconciliation, but for meaning. He needs to understand why she let go, why she didn't fight harder, why she could love him deeply and still walk away. And this is where the feminine becomes truly divine. Because she does not leave out of bitterness. She leaves out of self-awareness. She senses the moment her energy is no longer nourishing but draining. The moment her giving becomes a performance rather than a flow. The moment she realizes she is no longer a partner but a crutch for a man avoiding himself. So she withdraws. Not loudly, not with accusation or fury, but with the quiet dignity of a woman who understands her worth, cannot be negotiated. Her presence is a gift, not a guarantee. And in doing so, she awakens in him what Jung called the daemon, the inner spirit, the unconscious guide that arises during psychological crisis. He may think it's anxiety, he may think it's regret, but it's something deeper. It's the call to individuation to become whole, integrated, real. And it begins, as all real transformation does, with loss. His obsession is not about ownership. It is about identity. He has lost a part of himself he thought was solid. He realizes now that she was the axis around which he spun his illusion of emotional stability. She held space for his chaos. She listened between the lines. She offered softness, not submission, a rare thing in a world full of noise. And now, she is gone. You, dear woman, have become the archetype of the one that got away, but not because you played a game or disappeared to create mystery. You became that archetype because you honored yourself more than you feared losing him. That is what his soul remembers, not your body, not your texts, not your shared memories, but the sacred refusal to betray yourself for love. And whether he ever tells you this, whether he evolves or stays stagnant, is irrelevant, because you were not sent to fix him. You were sent to awaken him, to initiate a descent into his own soul through the absence of your presence. And that is obsession of the highest order. Not rooted in lust, not born of jealousy, but forged in the fire of the unconscious. The feminine leaves, and the masculine is forced to rise, or unravel. That is the power of your departure. Now he sits with ghosts. Not the haunting kind that rattle chains or whisper in the dark, but the quiet ones. The emotional specters of what he might have been if only he had seen her clearly. If only he had held her without trying to cage her. If only he had listened with the soul instead of the ego. These are not regrets he can confess, not to friends, not even to himself in daylight. They come in fragments in the pause before sleep, in the echo of her name on someone else's lips, in the stillness after pleasure leaves him feeling more empty than full. He begins to understand, slowly, that what he thought he wanted was not what he truly needed. He wanted admiration. She offered truth. He wanted comfort. She offered confrontation. He wanted attention. She gave presence. But he mistook her depth for danger, her mystery for manipulation, her boundaries for rejection. And now he must wrestle with the echo of a woman who required him to rise, and he did not. This is the terrain of the unconscious Jung spoke of so often, the place where archetypes live, where truths we dare not speak dance in dream and symbol. Here, the woman becomes more than a memory, she becomes mythos. The internal feminine he projected outward has reclaimed her place in his psyche, and her voice is louder now than when she was by his side. You see, the feminine does not disappear when she leaves the room. She expands into the space, into the silence, into his soul. She becomes the question he cannot answer, the wound he cannot name, the longing that no other woman can fulfill. And if he is wise, if the soul in him is brave enough, he will not run from this. He will descend into it. He will face his shadows, the fear of intimacy, the addiction to being needed, the pride that made vulnerability feel like death. He will understand that the woman he lost was not just a partner, but a threshold, a sacred test of his capacity to grow beyond the boyhood of reaction and into the manhood of reflection. But not all men will. Some will find comfort in forgetting, in distraction, in new relationships that require less and give more. In stories they tell themselves about how she was too much, or too emotional, or not supportive enough. These stories are not malicious, they are protective. Ego armor, to keep the soul from crumbling under the weight of awakening. And yet, she lingers. Not because she wants him to suffer, but because her essence is now woven into his psychic fabric, not as a punishment, but as an invitation to remember what it felt like to be seen, to be challenged, to be with someone who didn't need him, but chose him, and could just as easily unchoose. The woman who walks away in full consciousness becomes unforgettable, because she is not just leaving a relationship, she is breaking a spell. She is stepping out of the performance of worthiness and back into the temple of self, and in doing so, she becomes untouchable. Not because she is cold, but because she is clear, and clarity is divine. It takes immense power to love from the soul and walk away with grace, to offer depth and not drown in it, to open and then close, not with anger, but with reverence for herself. That kind of woman in Prince? She marks the terrain of a man's evolution. She becomes the axis he turns around long after she's gone. Because obsession is not always about possession. Sometimes it is the psyche's only way of honoring what the ego failed to hold. And the feminine? She does not need to return. She does not need to explain. She continues walking sovereign, soft, and whole. Her energy no longer reaching for the unavailable, but turned inward, feeding her own flame. She knows now. She was never too much. She was too vast for a man still afraid of his own depths. And that, in the end, is why his obsession began after she left. Because in losing her, he came face to face with everything he never dared to become. She is no longer watching him. Not out of bitterness, not out of pride, but because her gaze has turned inward, toward the quiet, sacred place where her intuition lives, where she no longer doubts her knowing, where she no longer shrinks her fire just to keep others warm. The man who once believed he held her heart now realizes too late that he never understood the terrain he was invited into. She was not asking him to worship her. She was inviting him to meet her, soul to soul, depth to depth, not as savior and dependent, but as mirrors in the divine dance of polarity. But to do that, he would have had to shed the armor, the charm, the avoidance masquerading as confidence. And when he couldn't, she left. And now, the masculine is alone with his echoes. What he sees, finally, is what Jung called the anima possession, a man consumed not by the woman herself, but by the projection of her, by what she represented, by the pieces of himself she illuminated and the wounds she gently exposed. Her power was not just in her presence, but in her restraint. She could have tried to fix him. She didn't. She could have waited. She wouldn't. Because real feminine energy does not chase. It draws. It radiates. It chooses. And when it is not met with equal depth, it moves on not as punishment, but as principle. This is what modern attraction psychology often misses. It's not the game playing, it's not the rules or strategies, it's the energy behind the behavior. A woman rooted in her feminine core doesn't play hard to get. She is hard to reach for anyone not aligned with her truth. She's not performing detachment, she embodies it. And that is what he feels now, not anger, not rejection, but the haunting freedom of a woman who no longer needs to be chosen. You, watching this, may know this woman. You may be this woman. And the moment you remembered your worth, when you stopped explaining your love and started embodying it, you became magnetic, not to all men, but to the few whose souls are ready. The man you left behind? He may evolve, or he may retreat further into distraction. But his obsession is not your burden to carry. It is the cost of failing to recognize the divine when it stood before him. And here is the twist: he may even come back. Not out of love, but out of need, out of a craving for what he now knows he cannot recreate. He may text, call, apologize. He may say the words you once longed to hear. But the woman you are now is no longer moved by empty gestures, because healing has given you new ears. You no longer listen for words. You feel the energy behind them. And you will know if he is changed not by what he says, but by what his presence communicates. Whether he's still performing, or if he has truly descended into his own psyche, into his own shadow, into the manhood that doesn't fear feminine power but reveres it. But even if he does change, even if he becomes everything you once needed, you still may not go back. Because sometimes the lesson is not in reunion. Sometimes the lesson is in reclamation. You do not exist to be remembered only in absence. You exist to be met fully, deeply, reverently. And any man who cannot do that will find himself revisiting your memory not as a regret, but as a compass pointing toward what he must still become. So let him obsess. Let him remember. Let him ache. You are not the echo of his lack. You are the embodiment of your own return. And the woman who lives from that place does not chase. She chooses. You know what it means to be met halfway, to pour into someone and feel them offer a cracked cup in return, to mistake intensity for intimacy, validation for connection, attention for presence. Somewhere, far beyond the noise of longing and the ache of unfinished stories, she has become something else entirely. Not the fantasy he projected, not the comfort he once consumed, but a sovereign force, untouched by the pull of being remembered, unbothered by the tremble of being desired. She has transmuted his obsession into her freedom. Because what he never understood, what so many never do, is that the feminine is not here to be captured. She is not a prize, a role, or a reflection of male desire. She is an elemental presence. She is the moon that controls the tide, the void that births stars, the stillness that makes men listen to the silence within themselves. When she leaves, she doesn't just walk away from him. She walks toward herself. And the woman who does that, the woman who leaves not in pain but in power, becomes untouchable. Not because she closes, but because she expands. Her life no longer orbits around being seen. She has nothing left to prove. She doesn't need to be chosen to know she's worthy. She doesn't need to be chased to feel beautiful. She doesn't need to be desired to feel alive. She knows who she is, and that changes everything. This is the path Jung hinted at in his work, the individuation of the feminine, not through compliance, not through becoming what others want, but through integrating the wild, the soft, the intuitive, the wounded, the wise. She becomes whole not by being understood, but by understanding herself. And in that wholeness, she becomes free of him, free of needing to be remembered, free of hoping for closure, free of waiting for recognition, because she realizes she was never his lesson. He was hers. She now walks with a different gaze, not cold, but discerning, not hardened, but refined. Her heart is still open, but not available to the unready. Her body is still sacred, but not offered to the unaware. Her energy is still abundant, but only shared with the grounded. She no longer rushes. She no longer explains. She no longer justifies her love. And he? He watches, from afar or from behind a screen, sometimes with remorse, sometimes with rage, sometimes with reverence, but always with obsession. Because he knows, whether he admits it or not, that he did not lose a woman. He lost a portal, a doorway into something deeper than comfort, more enduring than chemistry, his own spiritual evolution. And that is why his obsession began after she left. Because when she was near, he mistook her depth for danger. When she was gone, he realized it was sanctuary. But now, it is closed to him. And so she rises, not above him, but beyond him. And her life becomes her own again. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.
Do you now understand? Subscribe to Shadow and Silk for more.